Welcome back. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo made strong remarks on the issue of South China Sea. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy sent a destroyer to the region. What drives Washington's renewed strategic offensive in the South China Sea, and how should China respond? Joining us from Washington in the U.S. is Stanley Kober, Defense and Foreign Affairs Analyst and the former Research Fellow for Foreign Policy Studies at the Cato Institute. And from Shanghai, Professor Shen Dingli of the Institute of International Studies at Fudan University. Welcome, gentlemen. First of all, I want to show you what both sides have said. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said in a statement on Monday that, quote, "We are making clear that Beijing's claims to offshore resources across most of the South China Sea are completely unlawful, as is its campaign of bullying to control them." In response, the spokesperson of China's foreign ministry, Zhao Lijian, said, and I quote, "The U.S. statement disregards the historical facts in the South China Sea and breaks the U.S. government's public commitment of not taking a position on the South China Sea sovereignty issue. It violates and distorts international law, deliberately stokes territorial and maritime disputes, and undermines regional peace and stability." So, gentlemen, my first question to both of you is Mike Pompeo's remark a mere reiteration of previous U.S. position, or is there something new here? Why don't I go to you, Dr. Shen in Shanghai?
Well, I think it's not the same. U.S. this time is taking a clear position. In the past, the U.S. does not say China's position is legal or illegal. U.S. admits that China's position is controversial. But this time, U.S. has made it clear China's position is largely illegitimate. This is a clear departure from its previous position that injects more tension to the region rather than peace.
Well, Mr. Kober, what do you think? Is that your interpretation as well?
My interpretation is that it does represent a departure. The Secretary Pompeo is making a distinction, as I understand it, between territorial disputes and maritime disputes. He's talking about the resources, not taking a position on territorial disputes. This is a very fine distinction. I am more concerned by something else you mentioned, and that is the naval activity. We are seeing a lot of military maneuvering. This concerns me. And this is not taking place in isolation. We're seeing similar things around Taiwan. There are too many issues here, and too much military maneuvering, escalation, what I would call megaphone diplomacy. And I was struck last night, I was looking at the India-China relationship. India and China recently had a confrontation, several people were killed. There has been quiet diplomacy to de-escalate on that border. The contrast between the Indian and Chinese negotiation to resolve an issue and this constant escalation between the United States and China is striking to me.
Well, Mr. Shen, Professor Shen in Shanghai, President Trump has sort of made the South China Sea a new focus for his confrontation with China. Of course, previously he picked Xinjiang, he picked Taiwan, he picked Hong Kong. Why South China Sea and why now?
I think U.S. wants to find some new, fresh points in order to take advantage of the relationship with China. For those issues concerning Xinjiang, Hong Kong, these are mainly decided by mainly Chinese government. U.S. can say something, U.S. cannot do something. But for the South China Sea, U.S. can dispatch its fleet, its aircraft carrier to the region to boost the morale of the ally and to strengthen its military partnership with some country in the region, and in a way to hinder China's propagation of its position. Actually, China has different views with some of its maritime neighbors, but China has figured out a way, bilateral talks with Vietnam, with Malaysia, and with the Philippines in order to make the temperature lower. And also, the ASEAN 10 countries have been negotiating with China in its second phase in order to cut a deal of the South China Sea Code of Conduct, which may possibly make the entire region perpetually peaceful. And the U.S. may not find this very much interested. And the U.S. need to do something to refuel the tension in the region.
Well, Mr. Kober in Washington, let me go to you. I mean, how do you look at the role of U.S. military-industrial complex and, U.S. Navy's intervention in South China Sea? Because when you think about Lockheed Martin, Boeing, General Dynamics, they produce weapons, aircraft carriers, to be used, to be sold to U.S. Navy, and many of them are deployed in the region of South China Sea. And we know that these military security establishment has been a traditional GOP base. How do you look at that electoral factor?
I don't know that it's so much an electoral factor in the military-industrial complex. But one of the things that concerns me is not so much the conventional forces. We are withdrawing from really all the strategic arms control treaties from the Cold War years. The only one that remains is the New START, and if President Trump is reelected, I suspect we'll withdraw from that as well. We just announced the creation of a Space Force. This concerns me. As somebody who worked on these issues during the Cold War years, the growing confrontation potentially on the strategic level, the possibility of escalation. I'm seeing people begin to talk once again of fighting a limited nuclear war. Gorbachev and Reagan said, nuclear war cannot be won, should never be fought. I am now seeing discussions of this. This primarily concerns relations between the United States and Russia, but it also affects relations with China. When we withdrew from the INF Treaty, I was struck to attend a meeting in DC. Secretary Esper was in Asia trying to find places to base INF, which would then be directed against China. This was very quick off the mark, and I am concerned about that level of escalation. I see all these things working together, and they strike me as very ominous.
Very ominous indeed. Let's focus on South China Sea and the regional players. The code of conduct between China and ASEAN are in the works, actually. If you look at the fact of the matter is, a first draft has been completed and a final draft has been in the works. So my question to you, Professor Shen, why can't America let players, let claimants in the region sort things out themselves?
Well, America wants to have some maritime order in which America would be dominant. And this order, to some extent, is also good for the regional players because it provides the ceiling of communication to be free. But at the same time, U.S. want to intervene in the regional matter. For instance, China's Taiwan matter. Taiwan is a part of China. As the United Nations, U.S. and many countries recognize. But despite of this, U.S. still wants to meddle. South China Sea is a conduit for U.S. military, especially its Navy, to exercise pressure on China in case of need. Therefore, U.S. want to take advantage that America would be the dominator of the region. Therefore, U.S. May not be very happy to see that the regional player can settle their own dispute by themselves.
Right, Professor Shen, you know what? Secretary of State Mike Pompeo also mentioned South China Sea arbitration 4 years ago. The fact that, according to him, China violated the results of the arbitration results over there. But what we do not see in the Western press is the fact that the arbitration ruled on sovereignty. And China, along with dozens of other Western countries, made it clear that, UNCLOS cannot make courts rule on the issue of sovereignty, right?
Yes, according to the rule, the UNCLOS only would be used to settle dispute, to divide interest between nations about the maritime interest, economic interest. It has nothing to do, it is not designated with authority to settle sovereignty. For sovereignty, there is another world court, international court, a court of justice that is designed to deal with sovereignty. So the Philippines case mostly raised issue about the overlapping area between China's maritime, China's land-dash line with the Philippines 200 nautical miles. But the UNCLOS also said for those overlapping claimers, they can discuss how to settle the dispute by themselves. So the law does not disallow China and the Philippines to discuss bilaterally. And with President Duterte coming into power, he made it clear he would share the court PCA, Permanent Court of Arbitration's ruling. He would rather to talk to China bilaterally, how to settle our different economic interests. Meantime, China has also been negotiating with 10 countries, the ASEAN grouping, including Vietnam and the Philippines, in a multilateral way. This is what Foreign Minister Wang Yi has said, the two-wheel approach, bilateral, multiple bilateral process, plus 10+1 process. And all these are making progress. At this time, the US has bluntly changed its position to say you are illegal and I am legal. That is real a challenge.
Mr. Kober, how do you look at it? Do you agree?
I do think there is a problem here. As an American, I think we have not signed on to UNCLOS. And you know, the respect for international law sometimes, for example, the International Criminal Court wanted to investigate alleged violations here. And Secretary Pompeo said, no, you can't do that. And we'll retaliate not only against the people who want to investigate, but their families, which I thought was pretty amazing. This international law is being used as a weapon, not really as an arbiter now. And that is also unfortunate.
Can you elaborate on what you just said, that international law has been politicized, or rather geopoliticized as a weapon?
Yes, this is something that concerns me. We talk about a rules-based order, and you know, it would be nice, but we're just, you know, everybody uses it to beat other people over the head. And you know, if the decision goes against them, they just, you know, don't ignore it. And I just don't see these international rules being followed all that much. And as a consequence, we are back to power politics. And I'm concerned about where that will lead.
It would be unfortunate if, at the end of the day, power politics, great power rivalry, or this trap, whatever you call it, prevails over international cooperation. Or so was the belief of many. I want to thank both of my guests, Stanley Kober, former research fellow for the Foreign Policy Studies at the Cato Institute, and also Professor Shen Dingli of the Institute of International Studies at Fudan University.